Again, like I said earlier, I definitely appreciate being invited to come and give this talk. It's not something we hear a lot of times out there when we go to these meetings and are getting CEs and things like that. And you don't see a lot of guys talking about equipment. We have the lion's share as far as the market goes out there on our sprayers and things like that. And there's just not a lot of us out there as far as from the equipment manufacturer side. So I will jump right in. This talk I want to give today is actually called Application Economics. It's a little bit different than what we normally talk about, but it's a really kind of insightful look into why do we maintain our equipment, what do we do with it, and why we would want to spend money on it to keep it going. So I'm going to jump straight in. Really, this is kind of an introduction slide here. We talk about insecticide or pesticide application and why it's the most important part of pest control. It's kind of what we're expected to do whenever we go out on the job. But we really have to think about the fact that if we're not actually putting the insecticide or the pesticide out where it needs to be in the right amounts, we're not really doing, we're not effective at our job, if you will. So I'm going to get into the whys and hows and things of that nature whenever we get going. So for the last, I'm going to say 70, 75 years, we've been looking at the technical aspect. That technical aspect of insecticide application has just absolutely blown up over the last 75 years or so. I call that the modern era of pest control. From about World War II forward, we really have looked at the most effective and efficient way to put product out, but also to add to that using our latest products, and those products have evolved extremely well. I would say over the last, I'm gonna say 25 years, in going from mostly repellent products that were tough to work with and just smelled bad and were hard to mix and things like that, to what we have now in much easier application with a lot of things, a lot easier to figure out what we need to do with it. And that's a lot having to do with the instructions that come with it or the label. But it gives us much more effective control than what we had back, I'm going to say 50 years ago. So what we're really looking at now is this next generation of pest controllers. Our PCOs coming up have got to be concerned with the economic aspect of what we do. It's super important. People are lawsuit happy. We're not just talking about dealing with our equipment and making sure that everything works. We have to be concerned with the fact that we don't get a fine from misusing the product, or we don't get a ticket or write-up from one of the state guys or even a federal EPA guy that comes out and does an inspection. We have to be concerned with those aspects, but also we've got to be concerned with just being mindful of what we're doing, why we do what we do, and making sure that we can articulate the reasons why we do what we do as we go through about our daily lives. We want to use the most effective product. Sometimes that's not the least or most expensive. It really just depends on the actual situation that we're going into. But we have to manage that application, use our equipment correctly, and do all of that to get the most cost-efficient control. I generally ask everybody in a room when I've got everybody in person doing this, how many of you guys would like to make sure that you have a job this time next year, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? and of course, everybody raises their hand. If we're not being good stewards of our industry and we're not following the rules, we're not doing, what we need to do to be effective and cost efficient, we may or may not have a job a year or 5 years or 10 years down the line. So my objectives today are going to be twofold. We're going to present some economic aspects that's got to be considered as you're moving forward, as you go from being a technician to possibly a manager to even an owner. You've got to consider these down the line, regardless of what your station in the industry is. And we're also going to talk about how to reduce waste. That is a huge thing that goes on a daily basis. And a lot of times when I point this out, it'll be eye-opening, but don't overlook it. Don't dismiss it as being, oh, well, it's just small. It's not that big of a deal. Numbers add up, and down the line over the years, you can buy a truck with the amount of product that gets wasted on a regular basis, and that's just with a few guys out there, So look at this, take it for what it's worth, but I consider it to be important, and a lot of the owners that I've talked to out there also have told me this is an eye-opening piece of information that they're implementing and moving forward with some good info. So really what we look at is there's several application problems that we have to look at. The two most common are what we call over application and excess application. Over application is different than excess, and I'm going to talk to you about why and what they pertain to. We're going to talk about how they cost you time and money, and it's not, a lot of people think about, well we're mostly concerned about the product, but you really have to be concerned about time. As we have progressed throughout the years, our time has become more and more valuable. So over application occurs when more insecticide is applied or wasted, if you will, because of habits of the service technician. These may or may not be, intentional, malicious, or anything like that. They're more just things that we've gotten into day by day, and they become part of our routine. And we may want to look at those and change them. So let's look at some application bad habits. We all have application habits. Those are what may have been how we were trained, but they can be costly. Number one, and this one, again, don't take this as and just dismiss it. Because it's just small amounts. Underfilling the spray tank. Then we look at spraying to runoff. We're basically just wasting product when we do that. Not overlapping our spray patterns. That's, again, it can be minor. It can not matter 90% of the time, but the time that it does matter and we don't do it, it's going to come back to bite us. Then we have what I call the need to squeeze. This is generally when I explain where I'm coming from with that, I get a few giggles, but it is definitely something that we have to think about why we're pulling that trigger. Every time we're applying insecticide or pesticide, why are we doing it? And we should be able, again, to explain that to a rational person. Why are we putting product where we're putting it? So let's talk about filling the tank. The tank has marks on it. Let's not confuse those marks, though, for the bands that are there that are seams that circle the top and bottom of the tank. Those seams, they're not necessarily seams where metal is brought together because it's one piece, but they are there for rigidity for the tank. They're not there to mark any sort of capacity. The mark is actually that little dash in between the 1 and the GAL, or the 1/2 and the GAL on the tank. If we look down, as in the photo on the right, we look down inside the tank, you see that mark. That seam is right below it. The difference there is 16 ounces of product. And again, we think, well, that's only you know, a very small part of that we're mixing, but it's 12%. So if someone were to take 12% of your paycheck, you would be concerned about it if they were just taking it for no reason. I'm not going to get into my unfair taxation and things of that nature. But if someone were to just say, well, we're going to take 12% out of your check and you're not going to get it back, there's nothing you can do about it, you would be concerned. So this is the same thing. When I talk to you guys that are owners, that are operators, that are stroking the check whenever you have to buy the concentrated product, if you're not mixing it, you're throwing away 12% of that product. When you get $1,000 chemical bill, if you were to take $120 of that and just toss it out the window or pour it down the drain, nobody would logically do that. So doing it in small increments doesn't make it any better. So let's keep that in mind. Spraying to runoff is probably the biggest, I'm going to say, pet peeve of mine when I see people working and I go out in the field and help train guys that are doing this. We're not out there to drown insects, okay? That's not what we're doing. We're not looking to wet the surface. Now, with very few exceptions, we are not looking to wet the surface. If you're doing termite work and you're doing a pre-treat, then yes, we're wetting the soil, okay? What we're looking to do is soak that soil, so we're laying a barrier down. When we're doing general pest control, you know, in interior, exterior, perimeters, we're doing residential, commercial, it doesn't matter. We're not looking to wet the surface. What we don't realize is when we do that, we're just wasting the product. We also have to look at reasons why we don't want to spray to runoff. We have to protect groundwater, whether it be surface puddle water or whether it be water that is seeping into the ground and eventually becoming groundwater that somebody might be on a well. We could be contaminating livestock water sources, anything of that nature. But we have to consider that the amounts out there are measurable. I read an article the other day about a reservoir that was impounded back in the 80s. And they pulled a core sample from the bed of that lake not too long ago and ran a test on the core that was about a 10-foot deep core off of the bottom of the lake, and they had measurable amounts of chlordane in it from the 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever it was put out there and ended up on the bottom of the lake. It was there. It does not go away anytime soon. That stuff, it's persistent, it's residual, and we have to be concerned about putting that kind of product into the water because it's going to be there for a long time and once it gets into the ground. So let's look at a couple other things. We have target species and we have non-target. Some of those non-target may be endangered or protected or whatever. You know, there's a lot of different classifications for other animals or invertebrates or anything that might be out there. We always have a target pest and we've got to follow the label. It's just that simple. You know, it can become very complicated from very simple if we're not careful about what we do. But, you know, we don't want to find out later that we ended up having a mortality on a particular species that we weren't even aware was there. The other thing we have to be concerned about as well is we're dealing with people. We generally are applying our product in areas where people are inhabiting the area. And I kid about it with guys about, have you ever caught a toddler in a glue board? But it happens. You know, you don't want to have a 3-year-old run into mom with a glue board stuck to the back of their head. That's what we don't want to have to deal with. But, you know, they're not necessarily endangered species by any means, but they are non-target. We don't want to catch the customer's kids. We don't want to make them sick. We don't want them getting into our products, whether it's a rodenticide or dust or just being affected by, or, you know, touching or anything else, being in the area where we're applying product. So when we talk about wetting the surface, here's what I mean. This is a very small droplets that are blown up in a large picture on the screen, but we're looking to put droplets down. When we get uniform coverage, you notice not all those droplets are the same size. You know, when I was talking to Andy before we got started on this talk, and we were discussing mosquito control. And when we're talking mosquito control, we're talking ULV, which is smaller than 50 microns. We're looking at our fine or coarse fan being 3 to 4 times the size of the ULV droplets that we're putting out for mosquitoes. But we're still looking to spray droplets. We're not looking for a solid wet surface. What we're doing is we're putting our product out there, and we are letting that carrier dry. Well, we're usually using water as a carrier, and it evaporates, and that leaves the active ingredient in the droplet pattern that we laid out there. And we're basically trying to put it out there so these insects will cross over it, become a victim of that actual product that we're putting out. The contact with that residue is what we're looking for. Cockroaches have tarsal pads. Spiders don't have tarsal pads. Sometimes you feel like you've got to drown a spider to kill one, and you got to put the product right on them. But they do groom, and they will pick up the product, and eventually they will become susceptible to it. 33 droplets on a German cockroach is lethal, okay? And if you look, when you go back, it wouldn't be hard to have contact with 33 droplets if they're crawling across a surface that is covered like we have in the photo. So 33 is the magic number. Treated surfaces look like that other picture. Once they dry, that product is there, but it's not visible. A wet surface is not more effective. So we can have about 200 times different in the amount of product that we put out. And the smallest amount of product that we put out is going to be just as effective as it would be were we to put 200 times more product out there. And that's where we get into being able to articulate and explain reasonably why did we put product where we put it, and why did we use the amount that we used. We know that the state requires us to log how much product we used when we do a certain job. Every day we do that. It goes in manually or it goes into our software, and we're allowed, you know, we're allowed to continue to operate because we show good judgment in doing what we do. But let's not get outside of that good judgment. So spray pattern overlap. Again, it's a small thing to do, but it needs to be a good habit that we continue to have on a daily basis, and we follow up. We're making sure that we're doing it, because if we don't, we're going to miss something eventually. And is it a big deal when we're treating in a commercial kitchen for cockroaches? Maybe not as much as if we're doing a bed bug job. Or what about if we're doing a termite pre-treat? If we miss a spot, or if we're doing backyard mosquito control and we skip one bush where they might be resting, we're going to not have a lot of residual with the products that we use, and they're going to continue to bite our customer once we're gone. So we want to make sure that this spray pattern overlap is not just with our 1 gallon sprayers. It's with everything. We actually get good, solid, end-to-end or overlapping coverage with our product. With our sprayers, generally we get about an 18-inch wide pattern when the tip is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, if we overlap about 7 inches, what that's doing is letting the edges overlap where the coverage is thinner. We let the edges overlap, and that gives us good coverage. If we don't overlap, with our non-repellents these days, guys, they don't really know, the insect doesn't perceive that there's a barrier there. So with a non-repellent, they might just randomly get lucky and find the gap. And if they do, they're not gonna know. But let's say we are using a repellent. The repellent, they're aware it's there and they avoid it. If we don't have overlap with a repellent, it's basically giving them a funnel. If you've ever missed a spot on an ant barrier treatment and you came back because you got a call back because the customer had ants and they're still having ants, it's probably because we missed a spot and they found it. Single file, they'll go through a spot the width of a quarter, and we missed a spot that's 1 inch wide and they found it and they exploit that. So keep that in mind whenever you're out there, and let's make sure that we're paying attention and we're getting good even coverage. So this last one is what we call our need to squeeze. I get some giggles out of this simply because I ask everybody, how many people have ever had a customer follow you around and point? You know, they're going to tell you, oh, I saw a spider over there last week over by the wall over there. Well, that spider is long gone. Maybe they killed it, you know, with a newspaper or a phone book. Both are not used for what they're intended to be used for anymore. People that still have newspapers and phone books generally use them to start fires and kill bugs. So they're usually not reading them. People get their information online. But you know, going forward, if we're having someone following us around, pointing and directing us what to do, why are we even there? They could do it themselves if they're that educated and know what's going on. The fact is they're not. They're trying to be helpful, but sometimes you want to know that information. What have you seen? Where have you seen, you know, the ants? Where have you seen the roaches? Where have you seen a mouse? Then that gives us an idea of where we're going to go to look for the problem. However, if they're following you around and they're telling you how to do your job, that's when we need to stop them and just make sure that they understand that we are professionals. We understand how insects operate and what we need to do. And we appreciate the information, but we're going to be a lot more effective and efficient if you let us go ahead and do our job. So don't forget that every time we pull the trigger, we're applying insecticide. And it's product that if there's no good, reasonable explanation as to why we're putting it there, then we need to remember that we've got to be able to explain that. If we've got an inspector looking at us, they want us to articulate every time we pull the trigger why we put product where we put it. So this is a good time to grab your phone or jump on your computer and hit a screenshot of this. This is a piece of information that you're going to need to have, because I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a challenge of homework when we're done to go out and do a calibration on your equipment. And this is where we're going to talk about equipment. This is also good to know if you are using the crack and crevice straw. You're going to want to know these flow rates. So here's the difference. You know, when we start talking about the product, the crack and crevice straw versus a pin string. You know, crack and crevice straw uses about 4 ounces to treat the same amount of area that the pin string would use 9. We're talking about over twice as much product being used to do the same job. If we're trying to use the fan spray, number one, let's say we are treating a kitchen that's got baseboards and the roaches have decided to hide behind the baseboard. Getting it back there is tough anyway without making a mess. Using a fan spray is even tougher because it's going to splatter, it's going to run, it's going to leave product residue on paint and things that we may not want it on. So let's talk about some examples of over application. An extra 30 seconds on the trigger at each account. Let's say we're doing 8 accounts a day. And this is that need to squeeze, guys. Just an extra 30 seconds at each account results in an over application of more than a half a gallon of product during that day where we've just wasted product. If you can't explain why you're putting it there, then don't put it there. With the invention or the training that we do for IPM, integrated pest management, many times we don't even have to put product out once we get an account under control. We can use our glue boards. We can use our inspection techniques. We may use a bait or a dust or some other product rather than a liquid in our compressed air sprayers to get the job done. In one work day, if we waste a half a gallon of product, that's on average, on the conservative side, 10 gallons a month, 120 gallons a year. And that's just over applying by 30 seconds on our accounts when we go out. So let's talk about excess application. And we're going to get into why I gave you those numbers a minute ago and why I wanted you to take a picture or write them down. Excess application pertains to our equipment. And it's where we're wasting product because equipment is worn or damaged. So worn nozzles is probably our #1 culprit. When we get into the reasons why they wear out, I'll discuss that in a minute. But if you don't believe that erosion is a thing, you know, water under pressure or liquid under pressure causes erosion on a microscopic level or on a level the size of the Grand Canyon. It's all caused by the same thing, and that's putting a high volume and high pressure flow of liquid through a small hole or orifice or down a riverbed, whatever it might be, it's going to cause erosion. Old and worn nozzles are super common. You know, it does waste insecticide and it increases cost. I have guys say, well, tips are expensive. They are, but so is the product that we're putting out. And if you add up the minor amounts that you're wasting over time, you can figure out when is the most cost-effective time to purchase a new tip, and we go from there. So I generally throw this up there, and again, I usually get some giggles out of it. If this is what the tip on your sprayer looks like, please go ahead, excuse yourself, and go order one. It's definitely not the way it should look. All right. If it looks like that you beat it on the ground to clear a clog, or you've drilled the hole out because it kept getting stopped up, there's reasons for that, and it's not that the tip is too small. So we collected nozzles from around the country. We found how long they had been used, and we looked at the increased flow rate, but the average increased flow rate across the country was about 14%. Well, guess what? The magic number to replace one of these nozzles is 15%. So on average, at any particular time, if you were to go out and you were to pick 20 guys out there, 10 of them would need new nozzles. And that's kind of appalling when you think about it, when you're the guy that's writing the check to purchase the chemical that's being wasted. So flow rates can increase 10% pretty easily with normal use. But think about it, that's an additional 1.7 ounces per minute of product. So let's look at some examples of this. Hypothetical situation, we're going to do 8 accounts again. We're going to do 2 minutes on the trigger at each account. Just with 10% wear, we're looking at an over application of more than 1 quart of insecticide. And that's actually what we call an excess application, not over. Nozzle replacement, it's difficult to see when it's time. How do you know when to replace it? We calibrate. That's how we know. Now, I've gotten a few questions about this, so I threw a slide in here on brass versus stainless steel versus polymer versus ceramic. We make the nozzles out of brass because it is less expensive material, it's easy to machine, and it wears at an even rate. Polymer, cheaper than brass, okay? It wears a little longer, but it is much harder to get an even flow with a polymer tip, okay? You can't just 3D print one and get the size orifice that we need and the shape that we need to get a product out there. When they're molded, the actual polymers that are needed to do this, cost-wise, are pretty close to the cost of brass. So stainless steel wears a little harder, but it's a lot harder to machine. It wears longer, but again, it's more expensive and it's a lot harder to machine. So not only does the product cost about twice as much, but it costs us twice as much in tooling and time in order to be able to do a stainless steel. When we get on up to the ceramic side of things, cost is extremely high. They are extremely fragile, but they wear forever. That's why they're used as nozzles in water cutters and things of that nature, because they are very, very stout. They don't wear down. They're not as prone to erosion as softer metals are. However, keep in mind that the ceramics are super expensive, and nobody's going to spend anywhere from $150 to $200 on a tip for the sprayer when if you drop it one time or accidentally bump it into something, you would actually break it. So here's where we talk about calibration. This is the 50015 orifice. That is the coarse fan. All right, time to fill a 17-ounce water bottle. That's your regular old water bottle that you get. I've got a bottle here that's a Diet Mountain Dew, and if I look at it and read it, it's 500 milliliters or 16.9 ounces. Perfect size for doing what we need to do. We're looking at 1 minute with a new nozzle, should fill that bottle using the coarse fan. If we get to 53 seconds and that bottle is filled, we know we have about 15% wear. It's just simple math. When we get down to 48 seconds, okay, at that point, we see we're at 25% wear. Nozzles can have about a 17% increase in flow rate after 358 gallons. That's the exact number that we came up with, testing over and over. 358 gallons. everybody knows how much product they apply in a day because you're required to keep up with it. So if you know that you apply 2 gallons a day, just do the math and that'll tell you about how long a tip's going to last you. Now, we generally have a 4-way tip. So you might be using a pin stream sometimes on the outside if you're doing eaves and overhangs, wasp nests, things like that. But that's really about the only time you should be using that pin stream unless you don't have a crack and crevice straw. Then at that point, you might be using that pin stream for your crack and crevice. I recommend using the smaller pin, not the larger one, so you are not wasting and splattering product everywhere. But looking at about the 350 gallon mark is the good time to look at replacing that tip. I would calibrate when you get close and see where you are. And if you're close, then go ahead and get that tip ordered and get you a new tip on there. Now let's talk a little bit about termiticide and the gear that we use. B&G makes an excellent set of rods with tips. A lot of guys will make their own. The main thing, guys, is to know what your setup is doing, okay? You got to know what your setup is actually flowing. Now, we fabricate these tips to flow at 2 gallons a minute, but there are so many other variables out there with your pump, your hose, your valve. There could be a choke point that slows it down. You could have very high pressure or very high volume hose that opens it up. Just know that, you know, it's designed to flow at two gallons a minute, and 10% wear results in an additional 26 ounces per minute. That's about 10% of 500 gallons will be 50 gallons of product. Nobody wants to quote a job and find out later that it took an additional 50 gallons of product to finish the job, because that eats into your bottom line, into your profit margin. How do we know? We use a bucket, we use a milk jug, we use some graduated marked orifice that we can fill up and figure it out. All right, 1 gallon, 30 seconds. 10% wear is 27. We're just taking that 3 seconds off, and that shows us 10% wear. 2-liter bottle, you can do it. It's a little bit tougher to do. It's kind of hard to keep that kind of volume in a 2-liter. Let's talk a little bit about bait. You know, again, we're looking at putting the right amount of product where it needs to be. If we're using bait and we're doing it by hand, it's very tough. It really eliminates us being able to do crack and crevice with any sort of certainty as to how much product we put out. We can't see it. We can just put the nozzle in there, the little needle, and we put product out, but it's hard to see how much we're putting out. If we're just putting a little dollop down there, like in the picture, that's about 10 times more bait than is necessary there. They may look the same, even these very small placements. These are on graph paper, so you can see that there is a difference between them, but there's actually a considerable difference between them. We get 120 of these smaller 0.25 gram placements. We only get 75 of the larger ones. That gives us a lost amount of 45 placements. That's about a third of the tube that we just waste. Again, this is where I sometimes show a little video. I don't have it queued up on this PowerPoint, but a guy sent me a video not too long ago of someone who had done a commercial kitchen. And they were following up because the previous operator that had come in was not getting effective results, but they had taken bait and they had caulked basically the whole knee wall around the kitchen. It was about a 4-foot tall wall, a brick wall around this commercial kitchen. And there was a line of bait that went all the way around 360 degrees around the room. Again, they washed it all away because they have to clean those places. So that was basically probably about 10 tubes of bait put in there out of desperation because they weren't getting the job done. Nobody will willingly throw away a third of a tube of bait. So using a calibrated bait gun where you're actually getting the same amount with each trigger pull just makes sense, okay? It saves money in the long run. There's no reason not to use a calibrated device to put your bait out. You're getting an exact amount each time, and it allows you to also do little things like those of you that may know about using bait tacos, okay? Little pieces of wax paper, put some bait in it, fold it up like a taco, lay it out. It's easy to clean up later if it's not consumed, but it also gives you the capability of not making a mess and the ability to put out small amounts each time, and to let you go back and figure out exactly how much traffic and activity that you have. So let's get into the final part of the talk here, and that's talking about our sprayers and why we need to maintain them. This is the GD124 repair kit. There are some other compressed air sprayers out there on the market. You guys may or may not be using our particular product, but each one of them comes or has the capability of having a repair kit. Most of the parts are very similar across the industry in different brands, but you're going to need to have a repair kit available. And what I tell everybody is compare the cost of this repair kit to the amount of time that it would take you if your sprayer went down in the field and you had to return to the office to fix it or to swap it out. If that's a 2-hour proposition, figure out what your production is for 2 hours, okay? And compare that to this sprayer, to this repair kit. If the repair kit costs you, let's say it's $45, how much does 2 hours of production cost you? If your production is $200 an hour, that's $400. So this kit is going to be about 10% of the cost of 2 hours of production. Now, if you have the kit on the truck and you know how to use it, generally you can fix about anything that's caused that sprayer to go down within a matter of a few minutes. If it needs a new check valve, that's a 2-minute fix. If it needs a pump tube gasket or a nozzle gasket, or even a new plunger cup, the plunger cup at max takes about 10 minutes, okay? If you're getting into packing washers and things of that nature, you generally are not going to have to replace those in the field, or that longer valve spring, you're not going to put that one on in the field. All right, if it breaks, you're going to have a considerable amount of time, 30 to 45 minutes, if you have the right tools to disassemble the wand. However, it's still quicker than going back to the office. Have the tools and the repair kit on the truck, and it'll pay for itself the first time things go south in the field. We're talking about the tank itself. We recommend only using soap and water. I like to wash mine out once a week when I'm using it continuously. Wash it out at the end of the week with warm soapy water and make sure I got my residue out of the bottom of the tank. You can use a long handle brush. The one we sell looks like a bottle brush like this one that's on the picture. You can also go to Walmart and get a plastic toilet brush for 98 cents. That's the long handle brush. It gets you down to the bottom of the tank. Just remember, there's a siphon tube there. Don't break the siphon tube off while you're scrubbing. Okay, that's just common knowledge, everybody should know that there's a tube there. If you not aware of it, get your flashlight, look down in the top of the tank, straight down from where the hose connects, and you'll see that siphon tube. The pump mechanism, it can be a little bit, overwhelming if you've never taken one apart before, but just look at the way it's put together. If you're concerned you're not going to be able to remember that, take a picture of it before you take it apart, and then you'll be able to put it back together the same way. That plunger cup should float between the spreader and that washer that goes on top of it. It should float around. It should not be solidly clamped down. It should move. You want it to move because it's self-centering in the plunger tube. That pump tube gasket, that's generally what needs to be replaced if your tank won't hold pressure, but that's the best way to quickly fix that. I will say this, if you're still having issues with your tank not holding pressure, look closely at that flange that pump tube gasket sits up against. If you look at the red arrow, you will see that there's a flange right above that pump tube gasket, okay? If that flange is bent, then you are going to have issues with that gasket not sealing. You want to make sure that flange is good and flat. You can straighten it out with a pair of pliers, get it as straight as possible. Sometimes you can put it on a hard surface and use a little small hammer to tap it until it's flat all the way around. There's a lot of ways to make sure that it's fixed, but if you have it and it's bent, it's not going to seal correctly. Check valve has to be replaced periodically. When you're pumping the unit up, if it feels like you're pulling water into the pump tube, like you're pulling a syringe back to give a shot, then your pump tube probably needs to be cleaned and your check valve probably needs to be replaced. Again, that plunger cup, if pressurizing is difficult or it's not, you're not feeling like you're getting good pressure, a lot of times you'll get a crack in that plunger cup. Again, it's got to float between that spreader plate and that washer. Make sure you've got grease on it. That'll help it seal. It'll also make it much easier to pump that sprayer up if you've got grease on the plunger cup. Screen strainer, I'd like to kid about this. About 90% of the guys out there tend to throw that in the garbage once they have to clean it a couple of times. But just remember, it is keeping the dirt and gunk out of the tip. Clay particles are nothing to be concerned with. That's not rust. Generally, if you're in a rural area, you're going to find that you're going to have some red clay, and it's going to be in the water, and eventually it's going to collect on that screen. The other thing you see there is wettable powder residue. There's a couple ways to keep this from happening. Number one, mix your wettable powder with warm water if you can. And if you can pre-mix it and agitate it multiple times, pre-mix it for a few minutes before you put it in your sprayer. Don't dump the powder into the sprayer and then put the water in there on top of it. All you're going to do is end up with a clump on your screen strainer. Just remember, when you replace it, that closed end goes towards the hose. If you put it in backwards, it will not spray. You're going to end up just clogging everything up. Packing washers, they can be tough to get out. If you are rebuilding your valve, you can use a small flat or Phillips head screwdriver to push into those washers and unthread them out of the valve. That's the easiest way to get them out once you've removed that. Once you've removed that packing nut and you've removed the cable, pull the cable down. Please don't try to pull the cable out the tip. It does have to come out the back, but you do want to pull it down and get it out of the way in order to get those packing washers out. Nozzle gasket. I've had guys tell me, man, I lost that thing in the field and I made a mess everywhere. Ended up taking a bread tie and and using it as a gasket. And they wound a bread tie around into that little recessed area, and they limped along until they could get a new nozzle gasket. Not really recommended, but it worked for them. Having one of these in the truck is super important. I keep one on my key ring. That way I always have it. And if I need to pull it off the key ring and put it in the sprayer because I lost it when I switched my tip around, then I've got it. I know where it is. It's always with me. The biggest thing I want to make sure that you guys get from the equipment side of this is, scheduling and making repairs is the responsibility of the guy using the equipment. Your boss or your owner or your wife or your girlfriend, they don't know when and where and what time schedule you need to have with your maintenance. Only you know, okay? So keep that in mind. It's a lot less expensive to maintain the equipment than it is to have it break down in the field and you'd have to fix it on the spot. A little bit of trivia numbers here. Based on 2 tank fills a day for 6 months, that check valve's moving 38,000 times. The plunger cup, same thing, and lock spring. Soft seat gasket moves every time you pull the trigger 43,000 times. And that pump tube gasket is going to take about 1,000 times you loosening and tightening as you pressurize and depressurize the can. That brings us to the end of my presentation here. There's my contact information if you guys want to snap a quick picture of that. I do, come out when I can and do these in the field where we do hands-on rebuild classes. I can do it via Zoom. I'm based in West Tennessee. I visit Texas several times a year, so I'm more than happy to come over and help out. I'm training a guy that we have that we're cross-training with that lives in Houston. So hopefully within a year or so, he'll be confident enough to go out and do these hands-on classes as well. But if I can help with anything, by all means, let me know, and we'll go on from there. For your time today, and Andy, I'll give it back to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate that. And it's good information. There's nothing worse than being out in the field and breaking down, not knowing what to do. So thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Andy, I've got one question here. It's how many pumps for a half gallon of spray? We don't really, every tank is a little bit different, as far as when you're pumping it up. I generally, when I've got a full gallon in there, I will pump that sprayer about 20 to 25 times with a full gallon. That gets me about 30 PSI. So it's going to take more than that to pressurize for a half gallon. If you're only mixing a half gallon at a time, then again, you're going to have to pump a little bit longer to get that initial pressure. And I wouldn't depressurize it unless I had to, if I'm only going to be using small amounts. But I'm going to say it's probably going to take you 35, 40 pumps to get enough usable pressure, and you're going to have to continue to pump as you empty that out.
Yes, yes. Also, and something we've made sure our guys do is they take the pressure off their cans at the end of the day so they don't sit there pressurized overnight or weekend.
Absolutely. I definitely recommend that. I even recommend, if you've got a truck rig or a backpack, empty that can out at the end of the day into your truck rig or into your backpack. You're generally not holding pressure. Backpacks are on demand, so they're not pressurized all the time. Whereas our 1 gallon or 2 gallon B&Gs have to be completely pumped up to stay pressurized. If you leave that tank dried out at the end of the day, maybe rinse it out and pour it into your backpack or your truck rig, it will last. The parts will last much longer if they're not left submerged in product.
All right, good, all good information. Thank you very much, Chris.
Good deal. Thanks, Andy, and thanks to all you the TPCA members. And again, if I can be of help, reach out to me. I have technicians call and text me every day from the field for help, troubleshooting problems, and I don't mind at all.